morning, everyone. This is Julie McDonald with Microcom Technologies, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar with TYCON Systems. Today's host is Seth Ellen, and he is their sales and marketing manager for us, and he will be presenting today. If anyone has any questions, please submit them in the question box, and Seth will answer them at the end of today's presentation. Seth, thank you so much for being with us today. We greatly appreciate your time. I am finished for now. Please go ahead and take it on over.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie. Appreciate you letting me participate in this. I get real excited to talk about the products that we offer. We offer some very unique remote power equipment for off-grid solutions. And so it's, each design that we do is very unique from the others. And so, my job is very different from day to day. I do want to talk about our RemotePro system and our TYCON Power products to help you better power your equipment. So we will jump right in. And we have some main brands at TYCON. We have our TYCON Solar, which encapsulates our RemotePro, UPS Pro, and Breeze Pro, along with our TPDN Monitor Web. And I'm going to go through and break this down. So first, we're going to start off on our RemotePro system. Now, our RemotePro is off-grid power solutions. This is going to be completely like no tie into the grid power. You're in the middle of a desert, a mountaintop, a lake, anywhere, out in the farm fields, anywhere where you need power, but you don't have a way to trench power, pull power to that. And we have many different sizes. Each size is based on the total power bank and the solar panel array. So we have something like this. This would be a 15-watt solar panel with a 9-amp-hour battery. It'll give you 2.5 watts of continuous power. So this would be something like an LED light that you're powering just, during the evening or nighttime. Or it could be like an irrigation pump that is powered 30 minutes a day, right? Then we have a 30-watt to 35-watt solar panel with a 36-amp-hour battery bank. Again, something small, LED lights for a longer period of time, some pumps or sensors. We have a 20-watt system. This would be with our 85-watt panel and 100 to 200 amp-hour battery bank. This is and then what we try to do is for shipping purposes, we ship with 2 panels or 4 panels of 85 watts each to give you 170 or 340 watt solar array, and then again from 200 amp hour to 400 amp hour battery bank. And this would power, some security cameras, some access points, many different applications for this, gate sensors, that kind of thing. We have a 720 watt solar array, which will give you 100 watts continuous. This has a pole mounted enclosure, which will hold 400 amp hours of battery bank, as well as we provide the mast for this one because we really want to keep this low to the ground and not have, because they are giant sails. This is a fairly large solar array. And then we have a ground mounted aluminum enclosure that'll hold 720 amp hour battery bank as well. We also have a 4-panel and 6-panel. 6-panel isn't pictured, but we have a 6-panel system. So this is going to give you up to 2,000 watts. We design each system based on your specific application. So you tell us the devices that you're powering. We look up the total power draw based on the manufacturer's stats, and we look at the voltage requirements because all the different manufacturers have different voltage requirements for their products. And then we look at the peak sunlight in your area. So we'll look at the zip code or the city state, or if you're out of the country, we'll look at the city and the country, and we'll look at how much sunlight you have each day, how much peak sunlight, so that we can calculate to have enough panels and battery bank to keep your equipment up 24 hours a day. Or if you have a 8-hour requirement or 1-hour requirement. So we customize each system based on those different specs. So let's look at a simple design. When you go to calculators.tyconsystems.com, this is the first calculator that we have on that page. This is the RemotePro Systems Power Selection Calculator. So these are the different variables that we'll plug in. So we'll look at the load in watts. So you would find it on the data sheet. We look at the max power consumption. Then we look at how many hours of operation per day. How many hours in the day are you running this? Typically, it's going to be 24 hours, but it could be 6 hours or 10 hours. So just depending on what you need. Then you have the average hours of peak sunlight where you plug that in. And then the extra hours of battery backup if you need an extra day or 2 days in case of cloudy weather. So let's look at a typical system. So customer called in and said, we have 4 cameras. We looked at the data sheet. Each one was 8 watts. And the power, you power through PoE or 12 volt DC. So PoE is typically for cameras going to be a 48 volt or 802.3 AF AT. In this case, it would be 802.3 AF. And then we're going to look at our Easy Bridge. This is just one of our point-to-point bridges. Has a 4 watt power consumption at 24 watts. Need a way to power it. So we're going to look at our Versa switch, the SW5G-Versa. I'll talk a little bit more about that switch in a little bit. And that does have a 3 watt typical power consumption. So your total draw is 39 watts for this specific application. Then we're going to hit that lookup. Next to the average hours of peak sunlight, there's a little tab that says lookup. When you click that, it'll open a new window and you can type in the location. So this I selected Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I grew up. So we're going to look at the lowest month of peak sunlight per day, because we know if it's powered in December at 3.79 hours of peak sunlight, we know it'll power it year round. Now, if you do have an application that you're only using it from, let's say, March to September, you just use those months, use the lowest of that selected area, because we really don't want to over design. It's not bad to have a buffer, but if you don't need 4 panels when you can easily get by with 2, then that's the way to go. So now we're going to plug that into our calculator. We got 39 watts, 24 hours a day, 3.79 hours of peak sunlight, and you see now the lookup tab, and then you'll see that we're going to do a 24-hour buffer. I'm going to go back a screen. I do want to show you this because somebody's going to ask me about international. So for international locations, you can click on that PV Watts link. That'll open a new window, and that'll go to an international database, and you can select the city and country and be able to find the peak sunlight for anywhere in the world. So you'll plug all that in, you hit calculate, and it tells us that you need at least 282 watts of solar array and 312 amp hours of battery bank to keep this up 24 hours a day and have an extra 24 hours of autonomy. So obviously there's not a 282 watt solar panel, but we do have some suggestions for you. So we have the RPSTL 12/24 or a 48 volt version, a 400 amp hour battery bank, and a 340 watt solar array. So I'm going to break down the part numbers for you to tell you exactly what that means. And this is what your system would look like. So RP stands for RemotePro. The next are the type of enclosure we have. We have a die-cast enclosure that'll hold 9 amp hours of battery, a polycarbonate that'll hold the 36 amp hours, which is 4 of the 9 amp hour batteries wired in series or parallel. We have a small aluminum and a large aluminum pole mounted enclosure. We have our large steel, which is also pole mounted, and then we have our ground mount aluminum enclosure. The next part numbers would be the battery voltage. You can wire those batteries either in series or parallel. Series would double your voltage. Parallel just keeps the voltage the same. So if you need a 12 volt version, so this 12/24 can do 12 or 24 volt, or you can see we have a 24 or 48 volt version, or we have 12/24, 12/48 without the slash. What that means is that you have a 12 volt or 24 volt DC output from the back of the controller, as well as a 24 volt or 48 volt PoE output from the controller. So that's very handy for smaller applications. Maybe you're running 1 or 2 devices, need some PoE from that. The next is going to be our battery bank, or our battery capacity. So it's going to be from 9 amp hours up to 1400 amp hours. And then the last group is the solar panel array. So from a 15 watt panel up to 2100 watts. Along with our RemotePro system, we also introduced about 3-4 years ago our RemotePro mobile solar. So this is a 720 amp hour battery bank with 720 watt solar array. It has an 18-foot pneumatic mast. All of the cables in it are embedded in that, so it can protect from vandalism, from people trying to get your equipment. We include a pump inside that lockable enclosure, so it takes about a minute to be able to deploy and put that up to the highest 18 foot. You can, what I really like about these trailers, you can park it where you need, and then the panels can swivel 360 degrees, so you can face them south. So you just mount your equipment. We have an enclosure at the top, along with the switch to power all your devices. And you can just take it to a temporary site, leave it there for a month or 6 months, and then move it to your next site. So very handy in that. So let's talk about the different types of controllers that we offer. So there's a PWM, which a couple of examples, the TPSC 2420. This would be a 12 or 24 volt version, just a small 20 amp solar controller. And then the SCPoE series. This is where you have the 12 volt or 24 volt DC output from the back, as well as the 24 or 48 volt PoE output on the front. So PWM stands for power width modulation. This, to make it simple, it's kind of just I don't want to say dumb, because all controllers are fairly intelligent. All of the brains go through it, right? Your battery input, your solar input, and then your load output. So all of that handles it. However, it just doesn't do as well in lower sunlight areas. What the MPPT does, and we have several options of that, are that this will accept a higher voltage and a higher current from the solar panels, but still charge a normal voltage at your battery bank. So you might have a 48 volt version, but you're getting 80 volts from your panels. So this will help charge the batteries quicker. So MPPT is the maximum power point tracking, has a nice LCD screen. So it's just a touch screen. You can do all your configurations. So it does have more intelligence to it. But the main difference, it helps charge your batteries faster with lower sunlight. Then we also have our TPDIN SC4820. Now this is a 20 amp 48 volt controller, but also has a 7-port PoE switch built into the controller, and each port can be configured to be 24 or 48 volt output. And it also has our TPDIN monitor firmware built in, so you can remotely monitor and control your equipment. I'll talk a little bit more about the TPDIN firmware in a minute. Next is our UPS Pro. Now our UPS Pro would be used in areas you have power at your site, but maybe you need an extra battery bank just in case power goes out, or you have a lot of blackouts, brownouts. You just want consistent power. So we have many different options, same enclosure, same battery bank sizes. They just don't include solar. Now, all of our UPS systems are solar ready. So if you have a site and you just want to give yourself some extra autonomy, you can add solar panels to any of these UPS systems. So again, you can kind of see the 50 to 100 amp hour, the 200 amp hour, 200 to 400 amp hour battery sizes that will fit in. And when we design these, all of the components needed are included. So with our RemotePro, you get our solar panels, battery bank, solar controller, enclosure for all the equipment, and all the cables and mounting hardware. You just need to provide the pole, unless it's the 720 watt array, and we provide that pole. So let's do a design. We'll do the same one, right? 39 watts for those 4 cameras, access point, and the switch, and we want to have a 24-hour backup. Calculate, and you can see you need a 156 amp hour battery bank, which here are some of our different systems we recommend. You can use the UPS 12/24, which would give you 200 amp hours of battery bank, 600 watt capacity from that battery charger, or you can use our large steel enclosure. And that has the large steel enclosure has a 1U rack mount, so you can, if you have a big switch or midspan, something like that. We also include for the aluminum and the steel enclosures, we include DIN rails so you can mount your equipment to the door. Just makes it very handy and keep everything clean within the enclosure. All of our enclosures are NEMA 3 minimum, but all of our aluminum and steel are all NEMA 4 enclosures. They also include a thermostatically controlled fan to help prevent your equipment from overheating and getting too hot in the box. That's typically our concern is the heat. So we do include a fan with each of the metal, the steel and aluminum enclosures. Now, let's say that you're in an area that has low sunlight, but really steady winds. You can build the RemotePro into any of our 12 or 24 volt solar solutions. So it has a built-in controller, so you tie it directly into the battery bank. So when you have lower sunlight or sun goes down or anything like that, several days of cloudy weather, but the wind's going, this will help supplement and charge the batteries. It has a built-in braking system, so it will prevent from overspinning, and it also has, with that controller, it prevents overcharging the batteries. So this is a great tool for some applications, obviously not for all, but just as a great supplement to help charge batteries. When you're, maybe you're on the cusp of needing to build a bigger system, you could probably get away with adding the RemotePro to help give you that supplement if you're in an area that has a good wind. It does have a low startup speed, about 4.5 miles an hour, so that'll help charge, even with low speeds. Now, our TPDN Monitor Web 3. So this is a great tool to have for any remote areas. This allows you to remotely monitor and control your equipment. It has 4 relays, 2 normally open, 2 normally closed, which allows you can reboot your equipment without having to be on site. So if you set up a switch with cameras connected to the switch, you can actually set it up as a relay from your desktop or your phone. You can hit reboot and or you can set up an automatic reboot weekly just to keep your equipment engaged. We have email alerts, so you can set up controls if temperature spikes, voltage drops, anything happens, you can receive those alerts directly to your email. We also have 4 voltmeters, 4 current sensors, and 2 temperature sensors. So again, if you can set up the parameters that if voltage drops below a certain below 12.2 volts, you can turn off a relay to consolidate or conserve, conserve power to more important devices. You can log in via web or SNMP, and has the onboard data logger, history graph. So if you can log in and see, all right, sunlight, we're not getting as much sunlight as we thought in this area. Maybe it's shaded, and you can see the time of day that you're not getting power. So just a very great tool to have, whether you have our RemotePro system or not, whether you are using battery banks, anything that allows you to go in and remotely monitor, control your equipment is a very good tool to have. A couple different application pictures that our customers send us. So, this looks like they have power at the site, but they wanted to power some sensors just off the solar. And that way they made sure that if power went out, they'd still have those. We had a Shred Fest in Salt Lake City. We're based out of Utah. So they needed POS for all of their tents so that they can do sales and stuff. And so they put up a Wi-Fi hotspot, and we just provided our trailer to help power that equipment. So not a lot of power going on, as you can see. It's evening time, but plenty of sunlight during the day to keep that equipment up. A lot of just super remote areas, putting either whether it's some security cameras or some access points, doing some high-powered backhauls. Mountaintops are a big area. This bottom right, so this is a picture of one of our customers in Ohio. They wanted to light up the city sign. Now, what you don't see is just across the parking lot is their city building where they have plenty of power, but they didn't want to trench through the parking lot. So a very low-cost solution, they power the LED lights during the nighttime to light up their city sign. Construction sites has been a big area now. There's a lot of construction going on all over, so you can park this in there in the area until you have power, or if you want to just power the security cameras to protect your equipment, protect from vandalism and theft. This is one of my favorites. This is in the middle of a lake. So this is an osprey nest that they built, this little tower with a nest. They wanted to be able to watch the nesting and migration patterns of these birds. So they put up a camera, put up our system to power the camera, and then they have a Wi-Fi, just a point-to-point backhaul, being able to shoot back to their main building and be able to observe everything. So a lot of unique areas. You know, what's not pictured are like gate guards. We have some gates, automatic gates and stuff that they want to power, or irrigation pumps, security in the middle of the walnut groves in California, parking lots. There's so many different applications where you can now have power where you couldn't previously have it. And we're happy to help design each of your systems for you. Again, we just need to know the location so we can look at the peak sunlight, and the devices. So you can just give us part numbers, and we're great at tracking down the data sheets for that. Now let's look at TYCON Power. I'm going to spend a little bit on this. So TYCON Power is one of our brands because, like I said earlier, manufacturers have so many different voltage requirements for their devices. They might need 24 volt passive, they might need 48 volt passive, or 802.3 compliant. If you don't know what this means, I'm going to spend a little bit of time to try to give you some insight on this. But with our TYCON Power, we have all low voltage power devices. So whether it's PoE injectors, voltage regulators, DC and voltage converters. So we have anywhere from 24, 48 to 56 volt PoE out, passive and compliant. We have just a standard 10100, we have gigabit and 10 gigabit. All of our devices are hardened and they have built-in surge protection. And they do have an industrial strength operating temperature. So let's look at the PoE standards. So many years ago, everything was 48 volt, right? And so you plug something into the wall. This was back when you had Ethernet, you know, and ports in the wall and everything. But they wanted a standard so that you knew when you were plugging it in that it was going to power properly and not blow up your equipment. So they came out with the 802.3 AF standard, and that's up to 15 watts of output power. And so what this does is it basically gives you a handshake. So the handshake says, hey, are you 48 volt? Yes, we are 48 volt. Great, I'm going to send you power. If there's no handshake, then it won't send the power and it protects your equipment. So if you do plug in something that requires a different voltage, it protects that. Well, then, you know, then they said 15 watts isn't enough. We need some higher access points or high power access points, some high power cameras, PTZ. So they came out with the 802.3 AT standard, which is also known as PoE Plus. This is up to 30 watts, and this is a type 2 PoE. So again, there's that handshake, and it is backwards compatible with 802.3 AF. So just because it says 30 watts, it doesn't mean it's sending out 30 watts. It means it's capable up to 30 watts. So if you have an 8 watt device, no problem, you can still use that 802.3 AT part. Then the camera manufacturer said, you know what, PTZ is big and bigger, getting bigger, more power, all this big stuff. So they came out, I think it was in 2018, the 802.3 BT standard. Now this is still being developed, and we have many BT products already, but this has a 4 pair, which means so all Ethernet cable has 8 wires or 4 pair, and typically it sends data on 2 of the pair, sends power on the other 2 pair. Well, this says, hey, if we're going to give you 60 watts, we're going to need to send power on all 4 pair. You're still sending data on 2 pair, but now you have power going out. So this is the PoE Plus or 802.3 BT would be up to 60 watts. Now we have the 802.3 BT, which is a type 4 up to 90 watts. And that's what the standard is for 802.3 BT. You can still have a BT at 60 watts, but that would be what we would consider a type 3 or up to the 60 watts. So there are other proprietary PoEs. It's not a standard, but like UPoE or 4PPoE would be for like your Cisco or others that they designed. They are vendor specific, but we deal with all of the standards and passives And some do make them backwards compatible or cross compatible. But you just have to check that that manufacturer and make sure that they will work with a standard. Most of the devices that we use that we're working with all honor and follow that standard that is put out by the IEEE. So hopefully this makes sense to you. So when we're talking about compliant or 802.3, this is what we're talking about. It has that handshake to make sure that you're not going to explode equipment. Because in order to keep costs down, some manufacturers said, hey, we're going to do our access points, but with 24-volt passive. Well, that's not a standard. It's, you know, what you get is what you're sending is what you get. There's no handshake, which is fine. That works for 24-volt equipment. But if you plug in a 24-volt device into a 48-volt power supply, that's where you're going to have some damage. So that's where this handshake protects it. Okay, so let's look at some of our top DC converters. So this is where you have a 9 to 72 volt DC input, and you need 24, 48, 56 volt PoE out. Again, we have many different parts, whether you need passive or 802.3 compliant, up to gigabit, and then the same specs that I mentioned before. So here's a couple popular ones, our DC-DC 1224. What this does is it takes in 9 to 36 volt DC input. So you have a 12 volt or 24 volt battery bank, but you need a 24 volt passive PoE device. This would be the part number for you, up to 19 watts on that. Or let's say you've got a 24 volt DC battery bank. You need 48 volt, gigabit, and compliant. So the deep in the part number means that it's 802.3 compliant. And this would be a high power, so this would be up to 35 watts. Because it's 35 watts, we know it's 802.3 AT. We have many PoE converters. So let's say that you have a 48 volt switch and you need, you bought one of those 24 volt passive access points, but you want to power it, can't do it from the switch unless you have one of these guys. This is just an inline PoE converter. It'll take in 48 volts from the switch, drop it down to 24 volts to power your device. Or let's say that you have a 24 volt switch and you need to kick it up to 56 volts to power one device. You can use something like this, again, inline. It's a PoE in, PoE out, up to 35 watts. We have some VHP or very high power. So this would be up to 70 watts of power. I put the XX because there's 3 different part numbers. There's a 12, 24, or 48 volt input. We do have the 10 to 60 volt input as well, but if you already know that you have a 48 volt range, it's a less expensive option going with that when you have more designed. But this would give you, because it's the 70 watts, you need to power on all 4 pair. And then we released our BT, so similar specs, but it is now rated at 802.3 BT instead of the AT standard. So if you have a device that requires BT, this would be the one. Now we have many different PoE injectors, and what we term that is anything with an AC input. So you have the AC power cord, plugs into your wall. Same PoE output, same other specs. We do have a 10 gigabit version of this, and we'll talk a couple. So we have our 24 volt. It's gigabit, just a standard easy PoE injector with built-in surge protection to protect your equipment. So 48 volt version as well. Again, we have gigabit, non-gigabit, passive, and compliant. Here are 10 gig options. So the PoE Plus, pop quiz, how much output power do you get with a PoE Plus versus a PoE Plus Plus? If you said 30 watts and 60 watts, you are correct, and you can get a pizza for lunch today. So again, 802.3 AT standard, and then we have our 24 volt version. So this would be the passive at 10 gigabit and 24 watts. So when you just have massive data connections needed to pass through, this would be anything over a gig. This would be a great device for you. Then we have customers that say, I've got 48 volt version or 48 volt PoE, but I need to split the power and the data. So this would plug in. We have several different outputs. There's many, our customers are our inspiration. They tell us what they're powering or what they need. we designed something to match it. So this would be like an 802.3 AT in, so 48 volt in, and then it separates, either gives you 24 volt AC or 12 volt DC from that barrel connector, separates the data so you have still that Ethernet cable, or maybe you have a 5 volt USB connection. So a lot of different options for that. And then this would be a similar item, but it's just a PoE out. So, and they also gives you a 24 volt DC wire terminal output. So we have a lot of niche products that, you know, just fit certain solutions. So when in doubt, reach out and we can find the right product for you. This is another unique one, AC input, but now you have 2 ports at 56 volt output. So 25 watts per port, you're able to power 2 devices from one PoE injector. We have several unique PoE switches that I'll cover. You know, a switch is just basically a bunch of PoE injectors connected together. So we created many unique ones because there were so many different customers wanted to power many different voltages from the same switch. So very similar specs that you'll see from the others, but we do add to the addition of this, we have SFP output, which is fiber ports. So the SW3G, this is just a 3-port switch or PoE extender. You don't need a external power supply. You just plug in your 802.3 AT. You can run 100 meters, which is the maximum distance that you can run Cat5 cable. Plug into this port, and now you have 2 cables output that you can run another 200 cables of 100 meters each and power 2 different devices. So both at 802.3 AT. So great little tool to have if you've got a long cable run but don't want to run dual cables or, you know, have other power source there. You will need, it's not outdoor rated, so you will need some sort of small switch enclosure, which we offer, or if you have your own, that's great too. We have several different 5 gig PoE switches. These are all unmanaged. Here's just a couple of the options. And then we have, well, here's the part numbers. So it's SW5G dash and then Versa multi 24. The Versa is what I had mentioned earlier. This has 3 ports at 802.3 AT out, 1 port at 24 volt, and then 1 high PoE or 60 watt port. So this way you can power 3-4 cameras and your access point all from the same switch without having to have any additional connectors. The multi-switch is multiple volt input from the wire terminal on the back, gives you multiple volt output. The dash 24 is our most popular. This will take in 10 to 36 volt input and then convert to 802.3 AT out. So you have 4 port output with 1 data port in. So now you can power and it converts on all 4 ports to be 802.3 AT. Then we have the dash D, the dash NC, which is just non-compliant or passive. And we have our BT input. So you have that high power input and we give yourself more output power. Then we have our managed switches. So all of these devices are fully manageable. They're gigabit, 802.3 out at 4 ports or 8, and there are 2 SFP or fiber ports. Industrial temperature range, industrial strength. So these are great manageable switches with an online GUI. Then we have our more unique. So those are all, the others are 802.3 AT, but we knew that customers are using different voltages and wanted a manageable switch. So same specs, same manageable ability functionality, but with this, we have the SW8G with AT or 24 volt output. So you can configure to be 2448 just based on what you need at that switch. Each port you get 30 watts and it has the fiber as well. Or we have our 8G AT/BT/24. And I broke this one down, make it a little bit easier to remember. So you have 2 ports that you can configure to 24 volt or 802.3 AT. And then you have 2 ports at 802.3 BT up to 90 watts on both ports. And then you also have 4 ports at 802.3 AT. So many different applications that you have when you're powering multiple devices. Some great switch options there for you. Okay, and then we have some our PSDIN series. See, there's a 48 volt power supplies, DIN rail mounted, up to 120 watts or 240 watts. So you can power those switches that we just talked about, those managed switches. This would be your power supply for that. Lastly, we're going to talk about some accessories that we have for our power equipment. We have surge protection. This there's a gigabit. The 1000 is the gigabit dash PoE. We have a 48 volt version as well as a 24 volt, just inline surge protection. We have our rack mounted, so a 24 port rack mounted surge protector, and this is compatible with standard PoE, PoE Plus, and PoE Plus Plus. So if you have passive or compliant devices, this will work for all of those. We have another PoE extender. This is just a one port inline, so PoE in, PoE out. This is IP66 rated, so you don't need an external or you don't need an enclosure. You don't need a power supply, but you can daisy chain to get several hundred meters of cable run, Cat5 or Cat6. It is 802.3 AT, so it does require the compliance. We have a couple of PoE converters, and this came because the customers had some switches that they didn't want to replace, but they were all 48 volt out, but not enough power. They had, maybe it was a low power switch, so they had 15 watts per port but needed 30. So what you can do is take 2 ports from that switch, plug it into the PoE converter, converts up to 802.3 AT, so you can get 30 watts. Or let's say you have an AT switch, so 30 watts per port, you take 2 of those, plug it in, and now you have 4 pair 60 watt output to power that PTZ camera. We have many different voltage regulators. These would be for, you need regulated voltage. You can't, your device can't handle 13 volts. It needs 12 only. Most devices that take PoE can have a range. It'll accept a range within several volts. Maybe, but there's devices that only can handle 12 volt only, right? So I know that was redundant. I just want to make that clear why we have this. This is a wire terminal or bare wire connection output with an input. So you can connect it and make sure your equipment is getting exactly what you need. Many different ranges, so from 12 to 56 volt. Then we have our VRHP. These are wire terminal. So same range, 12 to 56 volt, but this gives you exact voltage that you need. So that is the end of the presentation. Hopefully that was at least a bit informative for you. Hopefully you learned a little bit, at least to the point where you know who you can reach out to when it comes to powering devices, both on grid or off grid. So I'm going to turn it back over to Julie and see if there's any questions for us.
Hey, Seth, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And of course, we do have some questions for you. Let's go ahead and get started with the first one. Here we go. Are the solar panels scalable, or will both the panels and battery packs have to be adjusted as a project grows?
That's a great question. So the answer is yes and no. Now I'll expand on that. Let's say you have a project where you put on a 35 watt panel and then your project grows and so you need another 80 watts. It's not recommended to mix solar panel arrays with each other of different sizes. So having a 35 watt with an 85 watt, not ideal. So you would need to, bump it up to an 85 watt panel. However, if you have a system that requires a 150 watt solar array, so you get our 170 watt, and then it grows, you can absolutely add our 85 watt panels to that. The mount that comes with that system can mount 2 or 4 panels, so you wouldn't need to buy a new mount as long as you kept these spare parts, and you're able to add to that. Now, if let's say that you had the 4 panel system like you see pictured here, that's 340 watts. And let's say your site or your project doubles, you can absolutely just buy another solar panel array like this with the mount it to the same pole. I would give it some distance on the height so that you have, so you're avoiding any shading, but you can absolutely tie it directly into that battery bank, as well as you can add more battery banks to that with the enclosure. So yes, they are scalable, but only if you're using like the larger systems. It's not recommended to use non-comparable solar panels with each other. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much, Seth. Let's go on to the next question. Regarding the software that's used for peak sunlight in a particular area, what is the software that you actually use to get this information?
I have no clue. That comes, I'm sure we can find out. So the one that when you click on, I mean, you can go to our website and click on that. And then when you click on the PV Watts tool, that'll take you to the international database, and that's somebody else's website, you know, that, so you can do all of the research from there. I'm not exactly sure where we get ours. I know that it is a database that's updated regularly that we have linked into ours, but I don't know. I'm not in charge of that portion of it. But if you really need to find out, we can find out for you.
Sounds good, Seth. Thank you so much. Next question is kind of a follow-up to what you just talked about. Can anyone go online and find that calculator and put in the necessary numbers to get that information?
Absolutely. We provide, if you go to calculators.tyconsystems.com, that'll take you to our calculator page, and we have about 5 or 6 different calculators. We have our RemotePro, UPS Pro, solar panel tilt calculator, so you can find out exactly what tilt you should have based on your latitude. We have how many hours of battery backup will you have available with our RemotePro. We have solar calculator. So, or sorry, not solar, wind calculator. So you can figure out how much wind you have in your area and how much power you'll have from that. That is accessible to everyone. So what I would recommend is you still engage our design team. We're happy to help. But when you're playing around, like I think it's kind of enjoyable, like to go on the calculator and say, all right, so what you know, how much can I get out of this system? Because somebody will come up to us and say, hey, what can I power with this? Well, depends. We have too many variables, right? Depends on your draw, depends on your peak sunlight. If you have more sunlight, you can have more power output. If you have less sunlight, you have less, you know, so there's just different things that you can do, but everybody has access to that. So you can kind of gauge how much, when you're selecting your cameras, how much that's going to affect the solar panel size.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Seth. Next question here for you. Regarding the RemotePro, will the information be updated daily or weekly, for example, for a more accurate information read?
So with the RemotePro, that I would assume you're talking about the TPDIN monitor firmware that's reading that, and you get to set the parameters, and that is updating daily. So I mean, in real time, you're able to see all of the points, how much voltage you're getting in, everything. You know, you can, like I said, you can set up the ping, so you can say measured every 10 minutes or measured every minute. Obviously, it has a limit on how much memory it can store, and it'll dump the oldest storage. But if you want to say, hey, I want to see how much power we get through this week, and so you want more data points, you can set it to that. So you get to set the parameters of how often it's tracking.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next question here for you. Are projects possible for 10,000 run watts per hour?
10,000 watts per hour, not what we offer. That would be basically a solar farm. So our largest system is about 250 continuous watts. You can obviously daisy chain them together and put those large systems together, but you're looking at a solar farm at that point. So typical houses, if you want to run completely off grid, which we don't do residential or business, but typical houses are setting up to do about 6,000 watts. And so we don't offer that. That's not our specialty. We're more in the remote areas.
Understand. Thank you so much. Next question here. Regarding TPSC PoE, will this be compatible with third-party devices?
Yes, because we power other people's equipment all the time. So this, you could use that as long as it's a PWM controller. So you can use it with lead acid AGM batteries. They won't work with lithium batteries, but they would work with any other type of battery. And with other solar panels, it's not proprietary. So yes, it'll work with other third party, as well as the load output will power other devices.
Thank you so much, Seth. Next question here for you. Regarding UPS Pro, will this work with the 200-watt solar panels, or does it have its own restrictions?
There's no restriction to that. You know, they're all solar ready. So let's say that you have a site and you build your UPS Pro. That means you have power at that site, but maybe you build it to give yourself 8 hours of battery backup. Well, then you see, you know, sometimes that's great, but sometimes I need 10 hours and you don't want to add batteries to it. Or you just want to give yourself extra autonomy. You can put on a solar panel, and as long as your voltages are matching, which is, you know, with our systems, that's fine. You could put on a 200-watt solar panel and give yourself supplement. It'll still pull from AC power, but then be able to charge the batteries when power is out and keep it sustained longer.
Thank you, Seth. Last question here for you. Are the solar systems shipped complete with everything a customer needs?
Yes. Now, we don't install for safety and shipping purposes, right? Everything is packaged individually, but we provide an install guide that is very easy to follow. You do not need to be an electrician to install these, and everything that you need is included. So your enclosure that with your batteries, so the enclosure holds the batteries, holds the solar and controller, as well as any extra equipment you may have. All of the cables and mounting hardware are all included. So the only thing you're providing is the pole to mount it to and the cables to connect to your equipment from the load, right? So everything else is included. And then with our larger RemotePro systems, we do include the pole to that as well. That would be, you know, for the 720 or 1400-watt solar array, a 7-foot pole is included with all the mounting hardware, but that would need to be anchored into a concrete pad. So those are a much bigger system. We do have a side pole mount, so if you have an existing pole, you can purchase a side pole mount and mount to that, but it's usually recommended to use the equipment provided, just because we want to keep it close to the ground. With the 4-panel system, it's about 11 feet wide and 8 feet tall. So it's a giant sail. So putting anything like that up high is not advisable. So, but to answer the question, I know that was a long answer, everything is included when you purchase the RemotePro or UPS Pro system.
Excellent, Seth. Thank you so much for answering all of those questions for us today. And also thank you to everyone attending. If you have any further questions, of course, please feel free to contact your sales rep or email us at sales@microcomtech.com. And if you wish to view any of the products mentioned or shown today, please visit us at www.microcom.us. And please remember, this webinar presentation has been recorded and will be uploaded to our Microcom YouTube channel so you can view it all again. Seth, thank you so very much for your time and all of your valuable information that you shared with us today. Everybody, have a fantastic day. And Seth, until next time, you have a fantastic day as well.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for inviting me. Have a great day.
Thank you.